Author of beauty, we thank you just for the glory it is to gather together as your people, to worship you today, and to learn from your scriptures what they have to teach us. I pray for our discussion today, and yes, Lord, that we can be stewarding after you both responsibly and with wisdom. It's in your mighty name I pray. Amen. So today's topic, we're going to pivot from a focus on money towards stewardship of time. However, I did want to kind of wrap up that discussion on money and tie it, kind of transition into this new topic, because I do think a lot of what we've discussed on money is applicable in how we approach time, and vice versa. How we approach time is indicative of how we approach money. So we'll wrap up that. I'll then go into some biblical principles on time management, the importance of managing God's gifts, including our time. Some stories in my life around creating margin in your life, and then how we ultimately can apply extra time for service. And then lastly, a panel discussion. So to start, I wanted to really dig into two lessons that Jesus gives us from the Gospels of you cannot serve both God and mammon. More modern translations of the Greek have pivoted mammon to just mean money or wealth. There's an absolutely excellent 20-minute podcast by Andy Crouch that I can't do his teaching justice in my own 20 minutes here. But if you're curious about some of these points, I'd highly encourage you to listen to this podcast by him. But he is describing how the enemy uses mammon to dilute what God has created. So in Jesus' other teachings around serving two masters, if we really are wanting to glorify God, we should be proactive in diminishing the power that mammon has over our lives. So Andy kind of points to how mammon gives us, allows us to exercise power and control over others. It produces a decrease in dependence on others. Oftentimes we say money talks, so if money's speaking for us, this can lead to us questioning, why do we need God if we have money that can fill the material or tangible needs of our lives? So ultimately, mammon is a demonic force that distorts human affairs, and it's prioritizing a purely material world. So as this plays out, it really is destroying relationships both between us as humans and our relationship to the Lord. A barometer I would encourage is that mammon is really it encourages both rash and the urgency that we have a hurry. We want to make more money now. So if there is any anxiousness towards that, to me it's clear that is driven from this principle of I need to make the most of my time to earn more, to do this justice. But really, we are called to reclaim the territory of this demonic force. God wants us to be in the world and to create multiples, of our investment. So Andy wouldn't go as far to say sell everything, but to be a good steward is looking to invest in a way that is going to be beyond your own self and multiply in further generations. So these are just a few of the topics that Andy hits on. I wanted to bring them up because I do think this is the bridge of how we begin talking about time. A majority of our time is spent working to earn a living, but to what end? Or what do we do with excess? So the other proactive suggestions made on detoxing or diminishing the power is number one, giving, because this releases control and stored value. So I would, we have talked about tithing, but giving is also of our time. If we view time as being more valuable than money itself, we should be looking to share that with others. Again, it releases control and the stored value of it. The second is prioritizing people. Again, any overly fixated focus on money and wealth is going to distort our connection to others. So pushing against that, trying to establish relationships, really leaning into the question of who is my neighbor. So if that is maybe a weaker area, you might look at investing in relationship to have people to prioritize or pour into. And then lastly, Andy is a big proponent of being transparent. So the more that we handle our money in secrecy or in isolation, it further breeds that same diminishment of connection. He does warn that you shouldn't be overly vulnerable or transparent and broadcast your salary, but you should look to share that in a means that is building relationships. So if it can foster closeness, that might be a good way of being transparent there. And then lastly and thirdly, serving God. Yes?
So what's the balance there, in your opinion, between broadcasting your salary and...
So I think the bigger point there is if you're boasting in your finances, that's obviously not going to foster relationship or be transparent in a means that is starting a conversation. So I'd say that would be one extreme. The other would be like sharing that with some stranger instead of someone you're connected with. Matthew?
For me, that's been the driving principle, like people that I know, who know me, who I know aren't going to be, it's not being a stumbling block for them. Those are the people that you might share that kind of information with.
Right. Yeah, I think it just takes discernment of...
And for a reason.
Yes.
Like for a distinct purpose that's helpful. Yep.
So these three are kind of what Andy proposes as ways of diminishing this power. And I think, lead way into our next topic of biblical principles in time management. So to begin, I was hoping for a few other folks this morning, but I wanted to propose a question and kind of do a survey of what patterns we see across how we think about time. So my question is, and the other reason I love this question is it really informs you on another's passions and interests. But how would you spend an ideal day if you had no other obligations or responsibilities for 24 hours? So it wasn't a vacation you planned, it wasn't a holiday coming up, but you just happened to have a bonus 24 hours. How would you spend that ideal day? So go ahead and share with a neighbor next to you. We'll take a few minutes and then kind of share a high-level summary. Okay, let's circle back. I think everyone might have gotten the time to share. But what did you hear amongst your tables? What kind of, was there a pattern? Some similarities? What did you notice? I know everyone is diverse here. We have some people that are retired, don't work, some people that have families. So what did people hear, or who would like to share?
I think everybody at our table wanted to slow down.
Okay, rest. It's very good.
Well, even just doing things that didn't necessarily have an end point, like doing things till you're done, or doing things till you move to the next thing, but not doing things on such a tight schedule.
Okay.
And doing things that are a little calmer and relaxing and meaningful.
Okay.
Self-directed.
Maybe not making a plan.
Not making a plan.
That's great.
Plan not to plan.
Charles or Joanna?
I have trouble finding time where I don't have obligations.
Okay.
But when I do have nothing else to do, then I spend a lot of time just doing a little bit more Bible study, listening to messages from people that I trust, and just trying to learn more. And in some cases, I've got a weekly Bible study, so I prepare for the Bible study.
Nice. Excellent. Yeah, I think spending time in the Word, that preparing for what's ahead. That's great. Anyone else want to share? Okay. Well, yeah, I just wanted to get us thinking about kind of, yeah, what stands out in how we approach time. I can share for myself, and being an extrovert, to me, my ideal day of just total free time, and if everyone else also had that commonality, would be getting in a group to go serve, to do that together for a majority of the day, and then return back to prepare a meal together, and then have fellowship. So to me, valuing time with others and looking outward of how that time could be spent along with others as a mutual encouragement is how I would approach it. But again, I think, yeah, depending on your stage of life or where, what obligations we typically have, I think thinking outside of that can be tough. So what does Scripture have to say on the value of time? I think first and foremost, God has given us, even from Genesis 1 and 2, seasons. We have, as Ecclesiastes also lays out, the importance of recognizing when we should be doing something versus another thing. We also have the finality of time. We're taught to number our days. And lastly, kind of in line with the idea of mammon, James 4 calls out kind of the warning against privateering, or how can I seek to gain wealth if we don't know, like making plans if we don't know what tomorrow will bring. So obviously the Bible encourages us to steward our time well. Lastly, prioritizing activities. We know that there's time for everything, and this should encourage us to ensure that we're in line with the season we're in. Could I get a volunteer to read Luke 12:22-31?
I'll do it.
Thank you, Matthew.
Luke 12, where do you start?
22-31.
22, 31, okay. And he said to his disciples, "Therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat, nor about your body, what you will put on. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothing. Consider the ravens, they neither sow nor reap, they have neither storehouse nor barn, and yet God feeds them. Of how much more value are you than the birds? And which of you, by being anxious, can add a single hour to his span of life? If then you are not able to do as small a thing as that, why are you anxious about the rest? Consider the lilies, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. Yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. But if God so clothes the grass, which is alive in the field today and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, how much more will he clothe you, O you of little faith? And do not seek what you are to eat and what you are to drink, nor be worried. For all the nations of the world seek after these things, and your Father knows that you need them. Instead, seek his kingdom, and these things will be added to you."
Thank you, Matthew. Yeah, this really stood out in my devotions this week of if we look at our anxieties around our needs, really by living into our faith, God is our ultimate provider. And likewise, as we lean into that faith, we should be considering our neighbors or those around us as just as much as God cares for our own needs, how we steward our time and the finality of it. If we're inward focused and anxious on our own being, we really can't exercise the freedom of doing that outside of ourselves. Which just the connection back to kind of God's love and care for us really impressed upon me differently in this passage on when we're looking outward, how God's heart is doing that for ourselves, which gives us the freedom to do that. So as we look at our time, obviously there is a balance here. We all have various seasons of life that we're in, but the commonality that we all share is a rhythm of work and Sabbath. So Genesis 2 highlights the need of Sabbath for our own rest and well-being. The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So if we are working to provide for ourselves and our families, Sabbath is our way of recharging. We rest every day. We should rest one day a week. And this not only is critical for our own physical and mental well-being, but it's also our way of having spiritual renewal. If we look at Christ and how he would retreat and find solitude to commune with God, that was his way of filling up his cup again to where he can pour out. So in a similar way, if we don't have a balance of Sabbath, we can't even expect to find, we're not going to have this freedom of our time. We'll be pouring from an empty cup or burning out. So this balance is what also allows us to serve others effectively. Again, we can't use our time, or how we're using our time should ultimately reflect the gratitude of that gift, in the same way of a bonus. If we had a spare moment or we have time to give, others have gifted that to us, we should be looking to do the same. But again, I don't want to overly emphasize this outward focus. I think, if we look back at what Andy was teaching on mammon, pushing back against that also it's important to consider our relationship with God. So other ways of using our time to honor God, first and foremost, prioritizing prayer. This is what, again, Jesus models in his retreating of solitude. It's our chance to reflect. Secondly, worship. Outside of Sunday, are we enhancing our spiritual growth through having gratitude or thanksgiving towards God? And then lastly, would be that serving others piece. So I think there is a balance here as well. If you're neglecting one of these, the other two are not going to be as fruitful as they ultimately could be. So I don't think there's a ultimate answer here. I think, again, depending on each person's life, these are obviously going to look very, very stark different. And I also want to recognize that being a single gentleman without family in the area, I am a minority in the sense of the dominion I have over my schedule and my routine. So that said, I think the commonality we all can express is that there's never enough time. We could all use more margin. And so I wanted to dive into this a bit more. And starting with the definition, I think margin is a overly used word. But ultimately, it's having extra space in our schedules for both restful activities and unexpected tasks. We can't plan for everything, and in fact, planning for everything, I would say, is exercising an obsession on control, which, again, is counterproductive to kind of the freedom of how we hold our time. So I would say the simpler definition of margin would be it is to be interruptible and not in a fixed state or direction. If you can't be interrupted or respond to something unplanned, I would argue that you really don't have margin. So this also encourages from that margin the importance of rest. If you have a micro break, this is crucial both for mental and physical to just rejuvenate. If you're slaving or working over 8 hours a day, over 80-hour work weeks, you are not resting in a sense that you can do that. You will eventually burn out. And then lastly, responding to opportunities. So I'd say early on in my time in Seattle, I was blessed in a community group where a gentleman shared how he approached time is he first prioritized having margin. Because in his viewpoint, that as a route allows him to be interruptible, to look to serve others or to respond to those chances to put something down and look outward. And so this was kind of what really changed and is a testimony in my life of beginning to slow down or look to do less to have that extra capacity. And I think the other teaching here, if we tie this back to money, is around gleanings. We are told to leave a remainder for others. So the same principle can apply to our margin of if we have packed our schedules full and there's nothing left to give, we can't respond to being interrupted or where plans go sideways. Any questions on what I've proposed so far? Disagreements?
I don't know if you're getting there, but I'm sure for a lot of us, we see this and go, like, it's ideal, but, it's really hard. So if someone's really looking at an overfull life, made a lot of commitments, I don't know if you're getting there, but like action steps to try to create margin, like any advice or any practical steps toward that?
Yeah, that's actually my next slide. Again, these all might be ideal, but this is, again, I was going to share a few more stories in my life of how I've approached this. And yeah, sorry if the text is small here, but these are kind of what I would suggest if you're saying, yes, I'm too busy, or I don't have this margin. What can I do differently or think about? But I would say first is prioritization. So if we really don't know what we are valuing or what comes first, we really can't fill in the blanks or use a spare moment well. So in the same way that Sasha, went through having a budget for her own finances, I would say a first practical step would be to look at a week and how your time is allocated. I think that will highly reveal kind of what those majority buckets are and what are these smaller buckets you're trying to pour into that, if you want to make a shift or an adjustment there, if you can't look at a week, and I think, we can blink an eye and a month goes by. So taking time to reflect on how our time is going and where our priorities lie would be my encouragement of a first step. The second would be setting realistic goals. So again, we can get in this ideal fantasy state of, if I just had more time or if I had 8 days a week. But if we set a realistic goal of a change we're wanting to make based off that reflection, it allows us to be motivated towards achieving it, and secondly, focus without being overwhelmed of like, okay, I just can't do this. This is a square hole in a round peg. And then lastly, allowing buffer time. So, if we do proactively account for less, we're baking in that buffer time where the unexpected interruptions that do emerge, traffic is bad, someone called out sick, the plans I had to use my work day don't happen, that buffer time is margin that we can apply and plan for. And then lastly, the last story I wanted to really share is last winter I had the pleasure of doing a spiritual retreat in Switzerland and got to experience more of a monastic rhythm where you're not, every day is kind of set and there's a regimen of work for half the day, study, read, and prayer for half the day, and then a strong emphasis on community and fellowship. So this allowed me to really experience the freedom of not having responsibility other than a routine, and really lean into the idea of seeking our daily bread, where even on my off days, we had 5 days of basically that work and study, and then 2 off days each week. And I proactively didn't make plans on those days to where I could really seek my daily bread of what God was going to reveal and do those days. So this was kind of a recalibration for myself in terms of how do I, it encouraged me to see the benefit of and the gift of an unplanned day, of I can really move at God's speed of what he's putting in front of my life, and live that out. So this, I know, is not as practical. I recognize the gift I had in doing that retreat, but I would say even, just starting with 1 day a month, I'm not going to plan anything. I'd say that's a practical first step of seeing what that is like, and trying to grow that. But ultimately, I think my advice would be, without margin, looking outward and taking on more responsibility in terms of service really isn't practical. So until you are finding you have a abundance of time or idle time, I think that's when I would encourage you to look for identifying opportunities in others. So Galatians 6:2 reminds us of bearing one another's burdens. So those that have unexpected needs, again, with this surplus of time, that's when we can truly walk alongside others. If we're burdened with our own responsibilities at home or not having that margin, finding those or even identifying those it's kind of a non-starter. But secondly, having awareness of needs. I think that idea of moving at God's speed is where you really can look outward and see the lives around you, and what their needs are, what assistance, what gifts and talents you have that you can fill there. And lastly, using our time as a resource for helping others is going to foster that relationship or foster creating new relationships. So it is a multiplicative impact of embarking on this. And ultimately, it's reflecting God's glory. Any thoughts? Yep.
How has being a deacon kind of like informed this? I recognize some of the language here, but I think others would.
Yeah. I would say even within serving in the diaconate, the idea of even planning for how we can help can ultimately change without warning or need. But I think the other reality to identify, especially from a diaconal standpoint, is that the time we give does come with a cost, and we don't know what the outcomes will be. Obviously, things we invest in can ultimately not turn to fruition or the growth that we would hope, but that is something in the giving of our time that we have to relinquish control of. I'm doing this out of my heart of I think this is the best way to respond, and I'm not beholden to, or I'm not trying to control that situation to the umpteenth degree. I can do what I can do to support, and I can offer that, but knowing the boundaries of this is where I've watered the seed, and God needs to, I trust that God will continue to do more here. That answer?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you have to be interruptible to be a deacon, right? That's like the first principle. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And being comfortable with, I would say, responding to that I think there are seasons where that can be overwhelming or a lot. And that does require the need to step back and look at how am I approaching this? How can I fill my cup in a way that I can continue to serve and do this role? Any other, sorry, I didn't pause to see if my proactive ideal suggestions were helpful, Matthew.
I think that's good. I mean, I guess the other question I have is how, like, you know, there's a lot of families in the church with like either younger children or, you know, preteen teen kids. Like, how would you suggest those families start with like serving? Because I think, right, it's tempting to say, oh, I'm so busy right now, I don't have time. But then it's great to like model that for kids. So like.
So my suggestion and what I think is most helpful is not so much the quantity as it is the quality. So as parents, if you know we're teaching how we steward our money to our children, how we're tithing in the similar sense, if there's one thing that you can do with them or at least demonstrate how you're using your margin, that is instilling in them how to think about and create that space. The second thing I would say is, depending on family dynamics, looking outward at all could be a no-starter. And I think that is, you know, if you're in a baby cave and have a newborn, you're not. But the idea of having this margin or even having structure in a day that gives those micro breaks is going to nurture those children to instill the same in how they look at time. So I would say it's more the quality of how you're approaching it and instructing them in your approach over looking for the ideal silver bullet case of this is how we can proactively do our mission with our kids. I think that the reality of those opportunities are very rare, but the more you can talk about, hey, Sundays are our Sabbath, and this is set apart, I think doing that teaching far outweighs finding a Saturday that you can serve at a food bank or look to serve the needy. I think I would suggest instilling a premise on the teaching over the doing until it does become more feasible to do that. Any other questions? Suggestions?
Keith, you've been through it all,
Well, the Seattle Serve things have been really helpful. Our kids have really enjoyed that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's good for them to like see like other folks in different stages of life who need help.
Yes.
And they usually come back like experiencing the blessing of having served others.
Yeah, that's great.
So, what I've been thinking about as you were going through this, I just, Steve Jobs was somewhat famous for once saying that the most important thing that he did at Apple was saying no.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, you know, prioritizing commitment. So in the case of finding time, you know, it's with little kids, it's, no, we're not gonna do this, so we can do that.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, and no, we're not gonna do X, Y, and Z because that, you know, that deprioritizes what our obligations are on Sunday, you know, or this, that, and everything else. So saying no strategically, I think, is a real important skill. And it does create margin because, you know, and most of that no, to be honest, I'll speak for myself, is saying no to myself.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? It's like, no, you don't need to watch that next YouTube video. Or, no, you don't need, you know, no, you don't need that extra cookie. I do need that extra cookie. So, yeah, I mean, that's, and then it's, again, pursuing the things that you love. Because you create time for the things that you love. You create time for your kids, because you love them. but at the same time, you have discipline in that. You know, we did like one sport at a time thing, you know.
Mhm.
We got off easy because our son just did not like sports. You know, but all these, you know, other time sucks, and you know, you prioritize things like school. Not, you know, that's something that you don't get to say no to. So, yeah, I mean, it's you know, it's the wisdom of living and understanding what you're trying, you know, what your goals are and what your priorities and commitments are.
Yeah.
And be willing to say no to yourself and to others.
Mhm.
There's always people willing to ask you to do something.
Yes.
I think comparison can be a real killer too,
Mhm.
where you look at another family and you see the activities they're doing, or you just look culturally at what people do. And sometimes the church is a little implicit in this. I remember doing a Sunday school on the book Crazy Busy. It was written by a pastor. And, you know, everyone here should really thoughtfully pray about volunteering in this, that, or the other fashion. And you feel like me supporting this thing means me like actually getting involved in it with my time and my efforts.
Mhm.
And being able to say, no, like I'm actually called to other things right now, but I can pray.
Yep.
I can do that.
Yeah.
And not feel like, oh, I'm now
Mhm.
falling short.
Yes.
I don't care about missions because I'm not actively doing something
Mhm.
isn't necessarily true.
Yeah. Yeah, just to kind of piggyback on Keith's statement, I think it also ties back to Sasha's teaching of a dollar can be only allocated one way. So if we look at time as well, the things we are saying no to, that enables us to say yes to the others or what we have prioritized. So the same principle of allocating that and knowing and having confidence in these are our priorities as a family right now. Let's have, you know, healthy boundaries around those to where there isn't creep or we're on the same page as saying no because this is what we're focusing on for this season. Yeah, any other thoughts here?
I think we could think of like time, like tithing our time in the sense that like always having, like no matter how busy life gets, even like in that newborn stage, thinking there's always a portion of my life that should be outwardly focused, that should be a gift. Like, so I think even when I had little ones, you know, we could be praying for people in the middle of the night while we're like nursing our babies or whatever, you know, these things that like we had the time where there's nothing to do. You're sitting there in the dark, you know? And you know, of course, you know, there are tons of prayer requests out there that get thrown out and you're like, okay, like, and so I had friends that would do that. Like I didn't initially do that, but I had friends that would do that and just be like, yeah, I prayed for you in the middle of the night last night or whatever, you know?
Yeah.
And I think not everybody has that capacity, but you have it maybe in that season of life and then you don't when kids get older, you're not up in the middle of the night praying for people, but and then you have these relationships still with other moms that are very precious at that particular season of your life. So there's like, you can look for creatively for ways in which that particular season is enabling you to give of yourself in a unique way. Doesn't have to look the same as somebody who's teaching Sunday school or, you know, it doesn't have to be the same, but you can be like really intentional about looking for a creative way that fits.
Absolutely.
You know.
Yeah, and I think back to both you and Matthew's points on prayer, like that's tapping into the Holy Spirit, who is omnipotent. He is everywhere. He's always accessible. And so it's not that you can't do something, but you're actually leveraging the power of God to be present and communing with Him in those needs, in those hard places. So yes, absolutely. Yeah. Last up, just wanted to further emphasize Acts 20 and the idea of it's always greater to give than receive. And as we are joyfully serving, we're able to find satisfaction. I think that multiplicative investment, when we are looking at how we're spending that time, it is it should be life-giving. When serving becomes a burden, it isn't serving its purpose to the degree that it should. That might be a reason to reevaluate either how you're utilizing that time or being creative to find a new approach to it. I don't think there's a checklist or a teaching that applies in every case, but ultimately I think if you're not finding that joy in how you're attempting to do this, it isn't honoring yourself, it isn't honoring it's in vain, if that makes sense. And then lastly, tying back to kind of our passage on Luke 12, that if we're seeking first the kingdom, we really can't miss. And even in our failures, God is growing us in that to grow. Either we learn from the failures and adjust, or we learn in the failures and understand that God covers our shame and our shortcomings, that in our weakness, his strength is glorified. I lastly would just encourage you that if God has placed it on your heart to maybe look outward, to approach that with grace for yourself and evaluate how you're using your time. So I know we have slightly less time for discussion, but any other questions over the course of our 5-week class?
I think that last slide was a good segue for, I'm curious if anybody has like a story of maybe tithing a vacation day or using your free time to serve others and just the fruit that came from that.
I mean, there was one time when there was a guy who had a couple really little kids and had like a big indoor painting project to do, kind of getting ready to move, and it was crazy. And I had a house too, and there's limitless things you can do on your own house with your own time. But it was I should help this guy out. I remember what that was like. It felt good. It was funny because I kind of put myself behind a little more in the things I wanted to do, but just knowing made his life a little easier. And when I left, it wasn't oh great, now I'm behind. It was more hey, that seemed right. That felt right. And I know it was a huge help to him. So just the blessing of doing that, and just knowing kind of feel I'm in the center of God's will right now.
Mm-hmm.
That was, and it might not have been a right decision on another day, but that seemed good. So sometimes it surprises you. You're oh, that was really cool.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when I was in college being the recipient of a family. There were a few families in our church that would have us over for lunch as college students on a regular basis. And so it really was formative for me in a very significant way, just seeing how their family functioned, because it was quite different than my own, and just seeing the kids participating too, their teenagers would help serve the meals and hang out with us and have conversation, and we'd have all these great discussions, and it was just not something I had grown up with, and so it gave me they gave me a vision for what life could be like. And later on, more so when we were living in Maryland, we used to host a lot and have people over a lot, and it became more normative, even though that's not how I grew up, but they cast a vision for me by inviting us into their home, and in a year, a time in my life when I was very open to learning that stuff. And so I think we don't know the significance of the impact. For them, it was just let's just have these college kids over. It's gonna be fun. Serve them a meal, no big deal. But over time, it was very, very formative for me.
Yeah, and I can also relate to that just in terms of being single and having time with others' families with their young kids. It doesn't so much matter what the activity is, but that blesses. One, that can offer support of an extra adult, but two, when you don't have kids of your own. Like, it enriches me of what family life is like. I don't get that 24/7, as many of you do, but that fosters both support for yourself, gives you those micro breaks, and you're ultimately helping and expressing the adopted family we have in Christ. So I think, yeah, that's a great example.
I resonate with that in my college, and then also, well, the Stricklands living in their house, and how you make time for other people. And I think for me, in terms of like serving, I really enjoy helping people with special needs or disabilities, and so that was something I was looking for when I interned here last year, or last summer, and 2 summers ago actually, and I was praying for God to show me some disability ministries I could support, but in that season, like what you said about being present in what season God's put you in, like I think God was telling me, I want your heart more than what you do for me first. And so, yeah, he didn't really provide any volunteer opportunities. I searched for them though. And then when I came back after my internship, I was still looking for that. And I saw things coming together, but nothing was really showing. And it wasn't until recently that I've been able to connect more with like different groups, whether it be Johnny and Friends, or Young Life Capernaum, or like an adapted baseball team. But those are like ministries that help people with special needs. And that has been very fulfilling for me. And I have the time for it. And I think it's especially encouraging for me just because it's something I've wanted for a long time, and then being able to see God bring those opportunities to me. And I'd say also, like in this season, I do have the time, and if I had what opportunities I have now, last year or the year before, I would not have been ready, and I would have gotten distracted from where God wanted me to be focusing on. But yeah.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that, Joanna. I think that, reminds me of a huge gap that I did not include in here, which is that God's timing is perfect. And I think having that passion and that desire that you hold, having patience around it of I am seeking this God, but I don't see it now. Holding on and being patient with that enables your eyes to observe where those opportunities do surmount. So if you are distracted or you toss that to the wind of, well, okay, God, I'll park this, you'll not find it. So I think it also kind of reflects back to that idea of mammon and the anxiety we have of we need to be in a hurry or we're in a rush to find something. I think that's when we begin to create and construct our own will solutions versus seeing God's plan and how that plays out. So thanks so much for sharing that. We're just about at time, but any other questions, thoughts, words of wisdom? Okay, Blake, would you mind praying for us?
Cool, yeah. Heavenly Father, we thank you for